very good evening and a warm welcome to everyone present here for the 62nd meeting conducted by the Study Circle. The topic for today is media trials and the court, and our resource person for the day is Mr. Sanjay Pinto. I request Mr. Raghavendran, advocate, to give the welcome address and a brief introduction of our speaker for the day.
Very good evening to one all present here. Today is the 62nd session of Study Circle. To make our evening more interesting and brighter, we have a wonderful speaker, Mr. Sanjay Pinto, advocate with an interesting topic. Before donning the black gown as an advocate in Madras High Court, where he specializes in media, criminal, constitutional, corporate, arbitration, and consumer cases, our speaker played the roles as columnist, author, public speaker, talk show host, former bureau chief, and resident editor of NDTV 24/7, executive editor at NDTV Hindu, and much more. Our speaker was a student of Loyola College, Chennai, where he did undergraduate in history and politics. And even during his college days, he founded and edited students' magazine in the college named as Loyola Herald, and also held the post of president of Loyola Debating Society. He contributed to a column called Campus Beat in the Indian Express. He also won gold medal and most outstanding student of the year award in 1984. Our speaker also completed a training course at creative writing through college tie-ups with Cornell University. Our speaker started his law graduation at Dr. Ambedkar Law College at Chennai and also won National Debating Championship representing Dr. Ambedkar Government Law College, Chennai. Our speaker is a former national debating champion with 106 victories in intercollegiate debates. He has completed his law degree in 1997. Our speaker made a shift from newsroom to courtroom in 2012. Our speaker wears many hats as legal columnist of Deccan Chronicle with over 235 published legal columns till date. As a panelist on national TV debates, the speaker represented India in IVLP program on rule of law and judicial reforms in USA in 2014, guest lecturer at law schools in India. As an author of 3 books, My NDTV Days, Justice for All, Speakers Are Made, Not Born. His second book, Justice for All, earned testimonials from Sri G.H. Vidyasagar, former governor of Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and television journalist Mr. Arnab Goswami. On behalf of our study circle team, I extend my warm welcome to you, sir, and we are very much honored and privileged to have you as a speaker of this evening, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnab.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There was an officer who had to go on an urgent errand, so he left his newborn infant under the watchful care of his watchdog. A couple of hours later, he came back and was shocked, aghast, to find the dog at the gate with its mouth blood-stained. So he pulled out his weapon and fired at the dog, killing it instantly. A few seconds later, he had heard a baby crying in the distance. So he rushed in to find his child happily playing her dolls and a dead snake on the floor. But ladies and gentlemen, has the media become a watchdog that has become a bloodhound today? Is that watchdog running amok, going berserk? Or are we actually jumping the gun like that officer? If you tune into the 9 o'clock news every night, you cannot be faulted for coming to the conclusion that in the court of public opinion, primetime television anchors, social media influencers, print and digital journalists today they arrogate to themselves the power to be judges, the jury, and even executioners in sensational cases. Now, here the accused can become a victim, and the victim can be hounded as an accused. Why? Because that fundamental canon of criminal jurisprudence, which is the presumption of innocence, is often turned on its head. The presumption here is invariably of guilt. There are spliced statements. There are allegations of the tutu meme, he said, she said variety. There are hashtags and trends that are treated like evidence. Somebody says no comments, that will be construed as a sign of guilt. So there is a well thought out, and even if there's a well thought out and vetted response, that runs the risk of being misinterpreted as damage control. For a moment, let's go, and look at how the courts have interpreted this trial by the media before the advent of the electronic media, before the Contempt of Courts Act, and obviously before the social media came into being. The Supreme Court, in a landmark judgment in Saibal Kumar Gupta versus B.K. Sen, had observed that it would be mischievous, that's the term they used, it would be mischievous for a newspaper to systematically conduct an independent investigation. The Punjab High Court went a step ahead. In Rao Harnaren Singh versus Gumani Ram Arya, it was more scathing in its view that liberty of the press is subordinate to the proper administration of justice. And the court felt, in its wisdom, that the plain duty of a journalist is reporting and not adjudication of cases. Reporting, not adjudication of cases. Do I agree with that? Obviously, this was a judgment, and times have changed since then. Because today, whether we accept it or not, investigative journalism is a reality today. But for that vigilant media, many scams would have been swept under the carpet. Few of them would have been exposed. The media, as one of the four estates in a democracy, is a watchdog. It's a watchdog, and it draws its legitimacy from freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, which, as we know, extends to viewers, extends to readers. But this fundamental right, and herein lies the problem, that many don't understand that this fundamental right is not unbridled. It is not absolute. It comes with reasonable restrictions. It's not a free-for-all. Free speech is not free-for-all. Because under Article 19(2), there are at least close to 10 reasonable restrictions, particularly contempt of court, which is relevant in today's context in this topic. Now, here's where I see, having made that transition from the newsroom to the courtroom, here's where I see a catch and a clash of constitutional safeguards. Because every time at 9 p.m. or even otherwise, every time a person's guilt is pronounced on TV or the social media, someone's right to a fair trial is violated. And this is inherent in Article 21, which protects personal liberty, except according to procedure established by law. These are the key words here. Procedure established by law, ladies and gentlemen, can never be an editorial agenda of a media house. It cannot be a trend on the social media. The Supreme Court, remember, in that seminal judgment of Zahira Sheikh versus State of Gujarat, 2006, was categorical that a fair trial would obviously mean a trial before an impartial judge, before a fair prosecutor, and very importantly, an atmosphere of judicial calm. Today, put your hand across your heart and let's ask ourselves whether, when you see all those OB vans going live with saturation coverage outside court buildings, whether that lends itself to an atmosphere of judicial calm. These are questions that call for introspection, particularly among sections of the media, at least the saner sections of the media. Every time, ladies and gentlemen, people are prematurely maligned in the media, their right to reputation is hit. The Supreme Court in Subramanian Swamy versus Union of India, 2016, that case where they refused to decriminalize defamation. The Apex Court held that reputation is both a fundamental and a human right. Both a fundamental and a human right. Every time an individual is hauled over the coals in the media, it could be an infringement of Article 22(2), which is punishment twice for the same offense, or what we know as double jeopardy. Every time a person is grilled on TV debates and forced to give either yes or no replies, it could affect their right under Article 22, Clause 3 on being compelled to be a witness against themselves. Although, of course, we know that such statements ought not to have any evidentiary value. But don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that there are penal provisions on defamation under sections 499 and 500 IPC, punishable under 500 IPC. Don't forget that the prohibition on disclosure of identity of victims under section 228A of the IPC or of children in conflict with law under the Juvenile Justice Act exists. Today, even recently, even this morning, I saw several social media posts that terrible, horrible case of rape and consequently murder. The poor girl died, where her name was given out in several social media posts despite this penal prohibition. Don't forget, under Section 2C of the Contempt of Courts Act 1971, Certain acts are barred that cause prejudice or that may be interference with the course of justice of any judicial proceedings or of the obstruction to the administration of justice. Don't forget that even under Section 8(1)J of the RTI Act, Right to Information Act, there is an exemption when it comes to the disclosure of personal information. Personal information which has no relationship to any public activity or interest or causes unwarranted invasion of privacy or even of those holding public office. So there is a misconception that those holding public office, the moment they accept public office, they surrender their right to privacy. That's not the case at all, at least in my opinion. And let's not forget, there are also international laws on the presumption of innocence under Article 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, under Article 14, Clause 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. There is this presumption of innocence that is recognized. But that is completely shattered to smithereens when you watch some of these media trials that go on in the name under the guise of debates on several primetime news channels. I must obviously give you a caveat here that there are honorable exceptions to this. Not everybody does this. There are definitely honorable exceptions. Now, as a former television journalist, as a bureau chief and a resident editor, having been there, done that, I personally believe that the media today has a right to not just report. The media has a right, a constitutionally guaranteed fundamental right. And that's really the beauty of fundamental rights. They're not merely granted, but they are guaranteed. The right to also analyze, the right to interpret, and the right to investigate happenings in public interest. Let's remember that the Contempt of Courts Act, which many consider draconian, under Section 3, Clause 1, it exempts innocent publication. Under Section 4, it protects fair and accurate reporting of judicial proceedings. So the line must be drawn so that investigation does not stray into adjudication. And I'll repeat this because this really is the crux of my view and my presentation. That investigation by the media must never, ever stray into adjudication. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is the domain of the courts and the courts alone, period. But it's easier said than done, right? It's easier said than done, especially on webinars, for us to sit and pontificate. Because we do know that the media is also a business. Responsible content that is not sensational does not attract eyeballs. It does not sell. What sells? Masala, sensationalism. That is what sells. So if Oscar Wilde had once quipped that moderation is a fatal thing, nothing succeeds like excess. A TV anchor and a former colleague and a friend of mine once joked, I don't mind a rat race if I'm the lead rat. So he was referring to the TRPs, which are the highest for slanging matches. And let's face it, right now when I'm speaking, if there is some commotion outside your house and you watch it through the window, will you continue watching this webinar? Or will you pause it, just switch off your video or take a break and go and watch what's happening there? That is that voyeuristic streak in all of us. That is what makes us watch these channels. Much as we are disenchanted with the media, I know of several people who watch these debate shows on mute. But they like to see people yelling and screaming, somebody getting up and leaving, somebody pulling off the mic. All this is drama, and it's interesting for people to watch. So these 24-hour channels, you must understand, are a monster. And feeding them 24/7 is a big, big challenge. That is why every developing story is milked till the cows come home. It costs less to invite motor mouths to a debate and put up a 1-hour show together than to actually commission reporters to travel and do real journalism. Real journalism involves pounding the pavement, talking to people, focusing on human interest stories. When I was growing up, I used to really be in awe of Prannoy Roy's World This Week. Little did I realize then that I would one day, join his organization and work for him for 15 years. And those were the days when you had, if you watch that half an hour, 1-hour program, you get a slice of what's happening in the world. Much later, the news tonight, and then of course NDTV 24/7. You watch the 9 o'clock news when you hardly had any channels. You watch the 9 o'clock news, and NDTV, as you know, was the first private news. You would get screaming. So my advice to you would be, just like you watch movies with a willing suspension of disbelief, please watch TV debates through your own prism of fairness, through your own prism of common sense, through your own prism of objectivity. Because it's time for viewers, for readers, for all of us as consumers of news to be vigilant, and not to be gullible. We must use our discretion and our sense of balance. This is my advice to you when you watch news. Now, many of us think that the media runs amok, as I said. There are no codes, internal codes. That's actually wrong, because there are media regulations and guidelines. Whether it was a Sushant Singh Rajput case, and I'm open to questions on that as well, or the Sunanda Pushkar case, or those insensitive, remember those bathtub reconstruction stories when actor Sridevi died. There is a need for self-regulation and introspection. And ironically, that Sridevi coverage came close on the heels of that 9-member constitution bench of the Supreme Court, that verdict in Justice K.S. Puttasamy versus Union of India, which upheld privacy as a fundamental right. Now, I was talking about this news regulation, the media regulations. There is something called the News Broadcasters Association. And this News Broadcasters Association has principles of self-regulation, which were in fact they were framed in 2008. And they are meant to be monitored by a jury of its peers. There are several. I'll just take you to a few important and relevant clauses. Clause 6 of the NBA guidelines very clearly stipulate that as a rule, channels must not intrude on private lives or personal affairs of individuals unless there is a clearly established and larger identifiable public interest. See, they use the words very carefully. Not just public interest, but larger identifiable public interest for such a broadcast. And the intrusion of public spaces must not be for salacious interest. This is very clearly, it's quite a loaded clause there, clause 6. Clause 9, it talks about sting operations that have become so fashionable today. Somebody does a sting operation, they call it exclusive investigation. Whole lot of things that's padded up. Sting operations, the regulations say, clause 9, says that it should be only a last resort. Sex and sleaze must not be allowed as a means to carry out sting operations. We've seen that in the past in 1 or 2 cases where it was used, very, very unfortunately. Then there must be no deliberate alteration of visuals or editing done with raw footage in a way that it also alters or misrepresents the truth or presents only a portion of the truth. You've heard of the adage, the camera never lies. Let me tell you, it can lie with a lot of special effects. The camera can lie. Then, you come to reconstruction. I spoke about this bathtub journalism, RIP, media ethics. Reconstruction, special effects, all that, people putting wine glass as props to boost ratings, they can actually be, in my opinion, interpreted as those deliberate alteration of visuals. Why? Because those of you who practice criminal law will know that reconstruction can originate only when there is an eyewitness. Reconstruction cannot be fictional. What happens usually, the suspects are taken by the police to the scene of crime. They are made to reconstruct the whole thing. So you need some facts, and you need real people to actually stage that reconstruction. And it cannot really be a figment of somebody's imagination. And especially when you want to boost TRP ratings, that is definitely disallowed. What I mentioned very briefly earlier, public figures, whether they are chief ministers or prime ministers or bureaucrats, they are also entitled to privacy. Their families are entitled to privacy. Their families have a right to grieve in peace when they pass away. Because let's face it, and this is where the lines are really blurred. Public curiosity is not the same. Public interest is not the same as public curiosity. Two are poles apart. Similarly, public interest is not all that the public is interested in. Let's look at, when I talk about, defamation in the context of people who are deceased, even the Sushant Singh Rajput case. What does explanation 1 of section 499 of the Indian Penal Code say? It says, it may amount to defamation to impute anything to a deceased person if the imputation would harm the reputation of that person, if living, and is intended to be hurtful to the feelings of his family or other near or dear relatives. Come up with all kinds of wild theories, baseless allegations, all kinds of fictional accounts. Imagine what you're doing. Imagine the feelings, imagine the sentiments of the relatives, the family members of the deceased. Was it suicide? Was it not suicide? Was it some other drug case? All kinds of theories are bandied about. Now, all these actually could lend themselves to criminal defamation, and we know that there's a 2-year jail term for that. Then we come to the social media, which really kind of aggravates the problem. But before I go into the critical aspect of the social media, I would like to concede that the social media today also occupies a pivotal role in public discourse. We have the four estates of democracy: the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and the media. Media, the fourth estate. I would go so far as to call the social media the fifth estate, not the fifth column, but the fifth estate, because a mass clamor for justice augurs well in a democracy. Ideally, it doesn't happen all the time, but ideally, these two forms of the media must function like a double-barrel gun. But firing solo, we've seen, when disadvantaged by the tyranny of distance in the south or the northeast, the social media needs to be credited for building up pressure on the authorities. We've seen that during the Chennai floods, but only after a bit of an outcry on the social media that the national media deigned to come and cover it in 2015. We've seen that in the northeast. We've seen that during the migrants crisis during the initial stage of the lockdown. But the social media's downside cannot be swept under the carpet. Even recently in the Sudarshan TV case, the Supreme Court proceeds of the matter. Several people implicated in that case. Justice Chandrachud asked very relevant questions in that particular during the hearing. In fact, they even asked the NBA, the National Broadcasters Association, to come up with guidelines. The NBA sought more teeth because, let's face it, whether it's the NBA which regulates the electronic media or the press council which regulates the print media, they are toothless tigers. There's no way they can enforce their orders. It's only some censors. They can only censor someone for a violation. And there again, that's split. I mean, there are two bodies now split right down in the middle. But if you look at frenzied hashtags, if you look at these hasty conclusions, if you look at these irresponsible speculation during investigation, all this goes against the rule of law. This kind of trial by the even social media goes against the rule of law. The social media, we must understand, is not a reservoir of expertise. They are not a body of experts. It is a marketplace of public opinion, and it is buoyed by what I call herd mentality, or the need to sometimes sound politically correct. Their impulse will eclipse reason, particularly during an evolving news story. This is a fact, and we've seen it. And we need to accept that. Unfortunately, many of these social media behemoths suffer from ostrich tendency, that they tend to bury their heads in the sand, or for whatever own vested interest they don't do much for it. Now there are scores of handles. There were scores of handles that came up with hashtags with the name of a minor rape victim a few months ago, oblivious of that prohibition to disclose identity under 228A of the IPC. And I mentioned even the same case, rape and murder in UP recently. One girl died, succumbed this morning, and that was trending. You violate the law, oblivious of what the law is, and that will trend. You put good content, for instance, you put webinars started by Study Circle. How many of these videos will trend? Somebody winking at somebody doing some bottle cap challenge, that will trend. This is the nature of the social media. This is the nature of the beast. There were those who even questioned, if you remember, during the Satankulam double murder, the custodial torture case. There were people who questioned the change of judges during the hearing of that Satankulam case. People are not even aware that in the Madras High Court, there's a routine roster change every 3 months. These people are not aware, neither do they care to bother to find out. Because rumors rule here, and there is no patience for proof. There's absolutely no patience for proof. Now, there's another very serious issue which definitely needs some kind of judicial intervention. Anonymity on the social media. Because there are people who are anonymous, they have pseudonyms, they don't have their real names, they have some pictures of monkeys or pets or whatever else, symbols, and they actually are abusive handles, especially on Twitter. This anonymity emboldens abuse. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, having the power to publish a newspaper. Now, to publish a newspaper, you need to give a declaration before the magistrate under Section 5 of the Press and Registration of Books Act, where you will give out particulars like the names and addresses of the owners, the printer, the publisher, the editor who is responsible for the selection of news. All that you'll have to give. Imagine not having to do anything of this and just having to publish. You can just publish some newspaper. You can do anything you want. You can then defame anyone. You can carry scurrilous articles on anyone. You can make it a big business there. There's no accountability, no way you can actually find out who these people are. Imagine what chaos there would be in society. Similarly, imagine if you're able to get a mobile phone SIM card without having to provide proof of identity and address. You'll end up making calls all over, making all kinds of hoax calls, calling up, abusing people. This is what will happen if you don't have any sort of, proof of identity where you can track it down. And very rightly, although if we all know that the Shreya Singhal versus Union of India case 2015, the Supreme Court, if you remember, just to take our, my viewers back a little, Shiv Sena chief, Mr. Bal Thackeray, had died, and there was a funeral there, massive funeral procession, being a very popular leader there in Mumbai. And there was one college girl who wrote a very critical post saying, why should the city of Mumbai be shut down? Her view, and I would say entitled to a view, justifiable view. Another friend of ours liked that post. She pressed the like button. Both these girls, college girls, were detained in the police station. Under what? Under a very draconian provision called 66A of the Information Technology Act, where, apart from other things, if your post causes annoyance to anyone, you can be hauled up. Fortunately, Shreya Singhal was a law student. She went to the Supreme Court challenging this, saying that it is otherwise the Constitution. And this important concern, in fact, was flagged. The Supreme Court struck down 66A. But I want to take you to what the government said in its written submissions in that particular case. The government said any individual, even using a smartphone or a portable computer device, can create and publish abusive material and make it available to trillions of people by just one click. Trillions of people by just one click. This really is the danger of social media today. Social media with anonymity, without accountability, without any sense of responsibility, without any sense of balance, without any editorial control, can really run riot. So this is something we need to be careful about. And as well-meaning people, we may be champions of free speech, but at the same time, champions of free speech must also understand the flip side and understand the reasonable restrictions that are laid down in the Constitution. Now, it's not as if nobody has done anything about this. The Law Commission of India, in its 200th report, had referred to, I'm coming back to the mainstream media, had referred to the prejudicial impact on suspects, on the accused, on witnesses, or even judges by this trial by the media. Often I wonder whether the topic should be trial by media or media on trial. The commission had cautioned us that even ultimately if a person is acquitted, he may not be able to actually rebuild his lost image in society. Why? Because any kind of defamation on the media is like a sped arrow. Once it's done, it's done. No matter what you do, because we live in a society where anything negative said about somebody is immediately believed. Anything positive is, people take it, they are very skeptical about hearing anything positive about somebody. Somebody makes some massive donation, gives, it's a charity, or it must be for ATG, etc. All kinds of, motives are attributed. Now, the Delhi High Court, in a very interesting case of Justice Swatantra Kumar versus the Indian Express Limited, had opined that media coverage can prejudicially affect the public mind, and there is a real and tangible risk of the plaintiff not getting a fair trial. The Delhi High Court completely agreed with this proposition and basically called a spade in this case. Now, there are practical aspects, ladies and gentlemen. And what are these practical aspects? If the suspect's pictures are telecast or published, problems are bound to arise during identification parades conducted under the Code of Criminal Procedure. And this issue was flagged by the Supreme Court in Siddhartha Vashisht alias Manu Sharma versus State of NCT. This is better known as the Jessica Lal case, where the court observed that the presumption of innocence of an accused should not be destroyed at the very threshold through the process of media trial, and that too when the investigation is pending. Because then you're prejudicing people's minds, so you're creating public opinion. And if the identity of witnesses is revealed in the media, they run the risk of coming under pressure from the accused, from accomplices, from perhaps even the police. We do know that India does not have a witness protection program. So in the absence of a witness protection program, any of these people who will come forward to be witnesses if they go to face threats and face the repercussions, many of them may be forced to retract their versions, which is what is happening today. Those who are in criminal law practice will agree with me. Many are forced to retract their versions at the outset. Many turn hostile later on. We also know of cases where, of course, again to give credit where it's due, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations here. Yes, I will be fair, although I'm now as an officer of the court, my loyalty is to the judiciary, to the court where I earn my living. But I must also say that there have been cases in the past, and we must acknowledge this, where a media outcry has led to retrials has led to retrials and nailing of the guilty. So whenever there are loopholes in the prosecution and somebody is let off the hook, the media then plays that role of a watchdog. So watchdog sometimes, plays. It's good to have a watchdog as long as the watchdog is under control, is on a reasonably tight leash. Now, what is the way out? The Law Commission, while it made those very pertinent observations, had actually come up with a very practical suggestion. The Law Commission had mooted an amendment to the Contempt of Courts Act to enable the invoking of Section 3(2), Section 3 Clause 2 for contempt, not just from the charge sheet stage, but from the arrest itself. Right? Time somebody is arrested, that this embargo on media trial should actually kick in. But that's actually a slippery slope, because I personally do not back for pre-censorship. With most news channels conducting sting operations, the Supreme Court, if you remember, in R.K. Anand versus Registrar Delhi High Court, R.K. Anand versus Registrar Delhi High Court, the Supreme Court said it would be, in fact, it was doing a lot of plain speaking. I think very, very erudite observations. It said it would be a sad day for the court to employ the media for setting its own house in order. And the media would certainly not relish the role of being snoopers to the court. And it added that to insist that a sting operation concerning a trial must be done subject to prior consent and permission of the court, to tantamount to pre-censorship. Now, media sting operation, the very essence of a sting operation is the element of surprise. If you're going to go through the rigmarole of getting permission, and that news will leak out and people will escape. So it's like saying before conducting a raid, the police should inform certain people, and of course they do need certain permissions there, but that element of surprise is lost. So there's a practical downside to that suggestion of the Law Commission as well. But the court, again, a very, very balanced view in this case. The court, very clearly and pertinently noted that a sting is based on deception, and therefore it would attract the highest legal restrictions and far greater stringency. This is what the court actually had said. Now, a lot of us, tend to argue that, when it comes to media trial, it's a creation. This media trial itself is a creation of critics. People say that, we are being too harsh. We're shooting the messenger all the time. That, I do agree to a large extent, as Lord Denning once said, if you don't want your dirty linen to be washed in public, then it's very simple. Please don't have dirty linen at all. So the media, yes, must be allowed that leeway, must be allowed that the ability to actually rattle skeletons in the cupboard, to play that role of a watchdog. Sometimes a watchdog may also need to bite, but bite the right people. But a lot of people say that this media trial ends up, it should not affect judges, and judges should be made of sterner stuff, blah, blah. Let's face it, judges are drawn to the same society. And it would be too much to expect of them, to be completely insulated, to be, 100%, objective in these cases, when they are constantly being, fed, and they're constantly being almost assaulted by all these media speculation. You pick up the newspaper, you switch on the TV channel, constantly being almost indoctrinated. It's a different matter. Judges, I'm sure, especially our judges in India, are much more, erudite, and definitely would be able to see through all this. But at the end of the day, it does have that effect. It's a big distraction. And it's very, interesting to note what Justice Benjamin Cardoza of the US Supreme Court at one script said: the great tides and currents which engulf the rest of men do not turn aside in their course and pass the judges by. Ladies and gentlemen, the media has a right, the media has a duty to expose wrongdoings in society. But the media must take a step back. It must introspect, and it must realize that what's just another story is also someone's reputation, someone's personal liberty, someone's right to a fair trial at stake. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
If anyone has any questions, they can use the raise hand option and I will unmute you, or you could post your questions in the comment box.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay, for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
Before we get back to other queries or anything, I thought probably one issue is that the basic principles of law which we look at is that until proved, a person is to be deemed innocent.
Yes.
By your own statement, you have made it that most of the cases, this media trials goes on adjudicating people. Most of the cases, the media trial goes on adjudicating people.
Yes.
And almost declare that they are the persons who have committed a crime or who are involved in so and so, so and so. what remedy they have under law. Now, I am being castigated or I am being put into a situation where my very existence becomes a question at some times because of these cases. What law protects me? Of course, you have referred to one or two judgments. Justice Swatantra Kumar and Mr.
Swatantra Kumar case is it's a case in point, sir. Because there, he went, in fact, see, when your reputation is at stake, and I said once it's spread arrow, then there's nothing you can do about it. And a lot of people, in fact, their right to practice a trade or occupation, 19(1)(g) is also hit because they may lose their job. They may not be able to go out and face society after that. I know of cases where people have committed suicide, innocent people who've been falsely accused of something based on whatever selective leaks that are given by investigative agencies. I think today the only remedy lies in getting an injunction from the court. But the courts are also very, very cautious before giving them, because this whole concept of free censorship is at play there. It's often a clash. That's why I towards the beginning of my presentation, I spoke about a catch and a clash of constitutional safeguards. Your right to free speech, along with the right to a fair trial. Judgments in the past have said that fair trial should take precedence over free speech. See, the thing with free speech is that people forget those 9 or 10 reasonable restrictions. If those reasonable restrictions are to actually be taken seriously, such media trial in the first place cannot be allowed. Under the Constitution, it would be unconstitutional. So I think the remedy, to answer your question, the legal remedy would lie in getting an injunction, as Justice Swatantra Kumar did in his case.
Is there any possibility of getting into a kind of statute? Now, ultimately, we go back to Constitution, Article 19, say either a petition, or you go for your common law remedy by filing a civil suit of injunction, which is based on specific performance.
Yes.
Is there a possibility of getting a statute, or is there any such statutes in other countries?
See, in other countries, in fact, defamation, defamation is one law that can be used, but the problem with defamation is that the time factor there, and you don't really get the remedy immediately. I mean, last at least 3, 4, 5 years. In the UK, for instance, civil defamation. Today, civil defamation hardly works. In fact, defamation itself doesn't work. Most cases are in acquittal or some very paltry token punishment, some fine is imposed. But in criminal defamation, the trial is the punishment. Somebody who does it will have to go to the trial. That will also affect their professional commitment. They will have to go make appearances in the court. But civil defamation, which is damages, in the UK, a person can become bankrupt. Here, there are several ways to get over it. You can file Order 7, Rule 11, a petition to reject the claim, saying there's no proper cause of action. But there again, this comes much later. The only thing is injunctive relief when it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing trial. Every night, somebody is saying you're guilty, you're guilty. Your right to the constitutional right to not be prejudged in a manner by people who have no access to the full facts of the case. Because even in a criminal case, it has to be proved beyond a shadow of doubt. Somebody leaks something down. All these things, the way they play out, I know how it works, the system works, because the police also sometimes they want to leak out selectively to certain journalists, certain people known to them, and these people then claim that's an exclusive. I've seen that even, for instance, during the Kanchi Shankaracharya case that I was covering when I was in NDTV, one particular channel went with a story fed to them by the police that the Shankaracharya had confessed. I refused to go because having with a legal background, I said, look, confession to a police officer is inadmissible in law. Why should we give it any publicity? So when my political editor then, Rajdeep, had called me, and I said, look, Rajdeep, and Rajdeep is also a lawyer. He had practiced in the Mumbai High Court before actually becoming a journalist. There he made it very clear, and he said, yes, Sanjay, I agree with you, let's not carry it. So there again, you need some kind of legal knowledge, legal awareness, even among journalists who cover these legal things. In fact, the Supreme Court had once suggested through the Bar Council that those who cover the legal beat should ideally have a law degree. I don't know what happened to that proposal, to that suggestion, but some kind of legal awareness. Those who cover Supreme Court, for instance, are extremely well tutored because they've been doing it for a number of years. They understand the issues. They are, but you find a lot of youngsters today joining the media. The average age in the newsroom today in most TV channels between 23 and 30. So some of them may not understand the nitty-gritty. They may not understand the difference between what is a search, what is a raid, the difference between detention, between arrest, between judicial custody, judicial remand, and police custody. But these are things that the greater awareness is there. Maybe news organizations should kind of have lawyers, have retainers with lawyers so that they'll be able to guide them, vet scripts, look at questions that are being asked in debates. So I think greater legal awareness is also called for.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sanjay.
Welcome.
I think Suresh Madhavaraj wanted to raise something.
I think I saw a question which was flashed on the screen.
Sir,
That is by Raghavendra. You can read the question, then I will put my question.
Right.
I mean, I asked that.
All right. So there's a question in the comment box from Mr. Raghavendran. The question reads as such. Recently, reporters of News 18 channel were targeted by people of political party, alleging that they were against their political agendas, and reporters and their family were also roped in. Ultimately, the reporters were removed from the channel, and how he's asking for your comment on this particular incident.
That is very unfortunate. I happen to know some of them personally, like for instance, Gunasekaran, who's a very fine journalist with a great reputation and credibility. So I felt sorry for Gunasekaran when it happened. Now, of course, he's gone to another TV channel. They even went to court. There was also an injunction given. But see, the problem is we have to understand how the media functions. The person who pays the piper calls the tune. Today, there are several corporate entities that have controlling stakes in the media. In Tamil Nadu, for instance, almost every political party owns a TV channel. So there, the medium is the message. In this case, it is wrong to impute motive. See, to say that so-and-so's father-in-law belongs to a particular political outfit, and all that is completely extraneous. Your father-in-law may have a different ideology. You may have the same ideology or a different ideology, but as long as there is tangible proof that it's affecting your credibility or affecting your editorial sense, then I think people shouldn't make wild allegations. I think that's what happened was very, very unfortunate. But yes, Gunasekaran, who was targeted, has moved on. We must understand a lot of cases, journalists also are not very happy about what they've been asked to do. Many of them are helpless. Take a particular line sometimes. Many of them are even restless. They want to really go out and do real journalism, but they're not able to because they're caught in this race for TRPs. A lot of people have left the profession because of this, those who are really idealistic. A lot of people have no other option, they remain there. And today it's extremely difficult to be a journalist today. Let me tell you, if you carry an interview with a politician from a particular party, tomorrow you carry an interview with the other, they will start branding you. The moment you do this, they'll say, oh, you belong to this, you're on their pay list. So you get very easily branded. It's not the bureaucrats who get branded. Bureaucrat who gets a plum post in a particular party in power is branded as that party. The next thing comes and you find it's a roller coaster ride. Same thing happens to journalists also. People are considered favorite. Fortunately, in my case, I had a good rapport with both Ms. Jayalalitha and Kalaignar Karunaநிதி, both of whom were very courteous and kind to me, and I really cherish my association with them. But I think by and large, if you're fair in your reporting, if you're fair in your editorial stance, then I think it should be a case of the dogs bark when the caravan passes on. Sometimes it's best to ignore.
Suresh, sir, you had a question.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Sanjay.
Good evening, sir.
My question is, how far this NBSA is effective, or is it supporting the issue?
I know, I mean, some of the founding members of the NPA were from my former employer, from IDTV then. It's a very well-intentioned body with very well-intentioned regulations in place. But as I said, and they themselves admitted before the Supreme Court when Justice Chandrachud asked them about it, that they have no teeth. They have no statutory backing. It's just a body of peers. It's a self-regulatory kind of a body there. So I think we need, like the press, first of all, the press council needs to be given the NBA, now that the electronic media is holding sway. I think we need some kind of legislation to kind of make them accountable. There has to be some accountability. People just cannot say what they want and get away with it. Because defamation hardly works in our country and it takes a very long time. As one of our members very rightly asked the very first question, what relief, what's the legal remedy? How many people can actually go to the court and how many people will have, let's say, the resources to go to a court and get injunctive relief? And how often do the courts grant injunctive relief? As I said, pre-censorship is something that is on their mind. The Article 19(1)(a) is always behind, clouds a vision of a judge saying, I don't want to interfere with the free speech. But then, the right to a fair trial. So, it's a clash between 19(1)(a) and Article 21 in this case.
Always,
and other
always.
articles as well. Yes.
This is a fight going on always. Between the right
lawyers. It keeps lawyers going also. So,
yes, that Supreme Court judgment about the Nakir, and that is the
yes,
the
yes.
first. Yes, thank you, Mr. Sanjay.
Welcome, sir.
There's a question from Mr. R. Amirda. He is asking if you agree that many reports and media trials are actually controlled and conducted by the media bosses themselves. So your opinion on that?
Well, it's possible, but I have no personal knowledge of it, so it would be irresponsible for me to comment on it. It is possible. It is possible. See, planted news is a reality. Paid news is a reality. To what extent it is going on, who exactly is doing it, that is something that, there's scope for investigation and scope for a fact-finding mission on that front. But yes, it is definitely possible.
Another question from Mr. Raghavendran. He is asking if sharing details and photos of victims and accused, although it is it's not correct, media houses just go ahead and keep publishing them. So he's asking if media houses should have some restraint or not. I mean, he's asking, shouldn't they have some restraint?
There is a penal provision, mercifully, 228A IPC is there. The clear disclosure when it comes to rape victims. And of course, there are a whole lot of riders there with the permission of the family. So even Nirbhaya case, much later the family gave permission for the name to be disclosed. Even this case, the UP case, which happened with the four victims succumbed today, absolutely brutal, horrific details that have come in, blood-curdling details about what happened. Why is that the media is? Why is that? In fact, I'd like to raise this question. The same airtime that they gave to Sushant Singh Rajput, why aren't they giving it to this person, this rape victim of UP? Because she's not from Mumbai? Because she's not from Delhi? Because the rest of the country doesn't matter? National television is only for Mumbai or Delhi. I've had this constant argument with my bosses when I was in NDTV. I used to, because NDTV is a lot better than the other channels, I must confess. I used to, joke with them. Is New Delhi television literally New Delhi television? What about South? Because then, unless it's a midnight arrest, unless it's a tsunami, or only then they kind of take notice. So I have had this constant debate with them saying that, look, you need to focus on the South more. And it's actually very strange because at one point when I was heading NDTV Hindu, when I was looking at the ratings every week, week after week, I realized that 54% of viewership for national news is from the South. 54%. Yet the South gets a raw deal. The South at least the South gets something, but the Northeast is completely off the map. So we need proper, and unfortunately, see, the thing is, let me get a little personal here and tell you, when I was in NDTV Hindu, we were the only channel that did not show that Nityananda sex video. Why? Because I took a firm decision, much against the views of the marketing team, that look, we are a family channel. There are children who watch it. And how do we know? See, how do we know the forensic whether this is forensically vetted or not? Any video can be, there are all kinds of special effects. But how can we be so sure? So as to there are individuals involved that their reputation is at stake. So I decided not to run that video. Ratings plummeted that week, and the marketing team said, "I told you so." We were the only news channel then, which it was a joint venture with the Hindu newspaper, NDTV Hindu. The only news channel which every time you would get these SMSs about blood donors, blood requests and all that, we would carry the only channel in the world which carried on the ticker blood donor requests. But what happened? Commercially, we were a failure. And it had to be sold, and today it's taken the form of Tandri TV. It was sold and it's become a Tamil TV channel today. So content, let's not kid ourselves, is not king. Masala is the king, queen and the kingdom.
So I have another question. So one of the first things that I learned in law school was about the jury trial system, and that it was abolished soon after the case of KM Nanavati versus State of Maharashtra. So
Yes.
at that point, the social media was not really a thing. And
Imagine if O.J. Simpson had to happen during the social media era.
So back then, based on the newspapers itself, the court felt that the government, they felt that the jury system itself is, they're getting dependent on the newspaper reports and the television channel reports. So when that is the case, I mean, like taking a parallel to current day scenario, how would you think the government or the courts would handle situation as that's going on right now? Like, what would be your opinion as a lawyer?
They are handling it right now. I mean, see, there are several cases which are sensitive, which have seen saturation coverage. Sushant Singh Rajput case, even bail also, during a bail hearing, People, TV channels carry reports saying that should not be allowed on bail, should not be given freedom. Who are they to sit in judgment over all this? Bail is the principle of bail is what? I mean, it's have to dovetail two conflicting interests. The interest of society and the presumption of innocence of the accused person. But without any, any research, without any sense of what the law states, many of these channels go berserk and carry stories almost like a campaign that they run. Some of them try to be politically correct. Some of them, for whatever, maybe they have an agenda. Some do, some don't. Some probably are just clueless. For whatever reason, I think by and large, the courts have a difficult role to play. I mean, I completely empathize with the honorable judges because it's very difficult to be constantly under this media gaze. It's one thing to say, as I mentioned, one thing to say that judges must be made of sterner stuff. They're human beings at the end of the day. And they do get, I wouldn't say influenced, but I think they do get affected by this constant media pressure and the constant media glare. It is a distraction. It is definitely a at least attempted interference.
Thank you, sir. So thank you so much for the session. And now I would like to request Mr. Om Prakash, Senior Advocate, to render the vote of thanks for the day.
At the outset, I need to tell that it was a very educative session, lot of learning for each one of us. And the manner in which you took us through was very, very good. It was an excellent session. You have in fact brought out in a very subtle manner as to judgments which governed. You had in fact suggested ways saying that there can be a system of like watchdog. And this has been one of the interesting areas which we need to learn, but at the same time, which I was finding that you don't have much to do. As you said, when you speak about remedies, everything, of course, there are so many people who get affected, but ultimately, even being not a victim to the situation, you sometimes feel sitting back that this was not right. And ultimately, we find that we are not able to do something. So over the period of time, I think people like you, when you educate more people and you bring about more awareness, and people may maybe start as a moment to look at situations where we need some kind of curtails on it. And as you rightly said that these journalists, persons who are covering legal aspects need to have some kind of a legal knowledge to that. That was a wonderful suggestion which was coming forth, and it is essentially a requirement which will be there. And I think the members of today's session had a good time learning a very interesting aspect. Thanks for your time. I know that you have been very, very busy. I have seen you so many programs, so many sessions you keep doing, as well as your articles you keep writing, your columns which you keep on going at. It has crossed more than 200 now. So in spite of all hectic schedules, you had been kind enough to agree to give a session to us, and you had spent a time on us. Thank you very much. On behalf of all the members of Study Circle, I once again thank Mr. Sanjay Pinto for the wonderful session. Thank you all.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Thank you.